This video is brought to you by BaseStrengthAI. You can find out more information and follow me along at BaseStrength.com. Strength Unknown is a pretty cool series that Martins Licis does where he travels to other parts of the world and finds aspects of culture where strength is a staple. And there's some really interesting stuff he does, and he makes it a bit thoughtful and artistic, although sometimes it has kind of the boilerplate sheen of traveling to other places, gushing about how beautiful and wonderful it is. Overall, I think it is really good. And it's cool that him as a creator is doing something other than the endless like diet swaps and food challenges of his strongman contemporaries. So I got nothing but respect for Martins for that. But the thing is, I've thrown shade at every World's Strongest Man winner in the last 15 years, except Martins. So I guess he's due. I'm going to raise an eyebrow here. I'm going to ask some questions because I watched his most recent installment where he traveled to Pakistan to chase down some Atlas stone style lifting. And as cool as it was to see the way they do things and how it is kind of tethered to their history, it made me ask some questions. Well, really one question. Does the shit weigh what they say it weighs? Now, since we all came out of the same dirt, it's no surprise that picking up stones seems to be a common tentpole, a common rite of passage, test of strength that is universal. But another thing that's universal is human beings being completely full of shit, and I never look at a feat, no matter who's doing it, without considering that likelihood. So there are some things from this that made me raise an eyebrow, and I have to investigate. That's what we're doing here. For instance, this stone is purported to be 200 kilograms. That's 440 pounds. They use this strap, in this case he's using a towel. Now that does increase tension and friction, so you can hike up a much heavier weight than if you had to pick up like a Husfeld stone with your bare arms. It's very thin, so the leverages are better. I'm not going to comment on the size because it could be very dense, could be not dense at all. We don't know. What I'm commenting on is the ease with which these guys are throwing it around, because Martins, we have a lot of videos of him doing things to shoulder, and repeatedly throughout this trip he was neglecting to engage with these feats because his sciatica was acting up, because he was saving it for the next thing he was supposed to do. And it just seems very odd that the grand champion of this arena, the guy that's teaching the world's strongest man himself how to maneuver this particular implement, barely has the physique of your average Montana ranch hand. Now, before I start calling bullshit on all of this, I want to point out the possibility that I'm wrong. That always exists. I'm operating off very little information. We're just talking about what's plausible, what's consistent with what we know to be true. I also want to say that incentives exist everywhere. Big fish stories are universal. It's part of the human condition. To think a culture or a group of people or a person is above that is to think they have some special angelic quality that has them sitting outside of the bubble of humanity, that they've ascended and are like a seraphim, pure, beyond lying, or telling a tall tale for the purpose of looking better in the eyes of their peers or their parents or their community. Many will call the questioning of this as some type of like cynical, possibly racist move that is only fueled by the idea that, well, these people in the third world don't have scales or standards and they're just making shit up as they go. I've been competing for over 20 years. Strongman in the United States is an extraordinarily white sport. And of all the people I've ever come across who have lied, people who fudge weights, people who take records they didn't earn, people who use band gears, guy wearing a slingshot underneath his singlet, does that ring a bell? There is no shortage of that in strength sports. And most of the ones I'm familiar with were indeed white dudes from America. So I promise I'm not assigning malice to this group of people that I wouldn't assign to anybody else. Now here they go over the system they used to weigh. So like it's increments of 40. They have a name for what 40 kilograms is. So this is 3 units of 40 plus an additional 10 or 20. And I wanted to talk shit about that so bad as being like a backwards nonsense way. Like, why don't just write it down? And then I realized that's exactly how we fucking do height and weight. Now, the funny thing is they addressed exactly how this stuff gets weighed. And they use this very modern, very cutting edge system for accurately weighing weights. This is a balance. This is an old school balance. And I don't even know what the thing is. I don't know if those are bricks. I don't know if those are different things on there. All I know is we're not getting closer to certainty or closer to eliminating all sources of error. In fact, we are just inviting much more of it. There were also times where it seemed like they were going to bat for these guys, like really trying to sell it because we, the viewer, might be skeptical. So Martins would say things like, well, we know heavy. That's not a measurement. Like in one clip, Romart goes up and like tugs on the 400-pound cylinder block, and he just kind of wiggles it and says, oh, that's heavy. Now this block snatching gives me the most pause Because of the technique, it's compact, you have a vertical handle, so the grip kind of makes sense. And ideally, they glue it back and really use their hips to snap it forward so you can get a lot of power. This looks like it shouldn't make sense. This should be an obvious no, right? This is a skosh over 400 pounds. This guy looks like he weighs a buck 70. He's kind of wiry. And he comes up, and here's Romark tugging on it saying, oh, that's heavy. The way he runs up on this thing, if you notice, he keeps it close to his hips. He snaps. It's much more swing than pull. And the fact that once he swings, he's just leaning back and pulling it to himself. So it's not a pull, it's a swing, which might potentiate, it might allow for a lot more weight here. So there's like room for plausibility. I mean, he's got a little bit of muscular development, about on par with like your average triathlete, but he's got a lanky build. He does a good job of snapping his hips into it. You could potentially get a lot of power. And while I can recognize that's advantage, like a standing glute bridge, I don't know if 408 can move that easily in that position. I don't have a frame of reference. So I can recognize that it's more swing than pull. He gets it out and then leans back instead of getting vertical and trying to keep it close to him. And that probably works to his benefit. This teeters. I could see myself being completely wrong, and this is actually a plausible lift. I could also see the best guys in the world trying this, like, there's no way that weight moves like that. It's kind of an unknown for me. But again, in the face of that unknown, if you're going to make this documentary and show the entire world these amazing feats, there has to be legitimacy. Now let's get to this one. This one is the one that's been screwing with me the most, and that is the stone clean. I mean, holy crap, what they do with this thing. It's like, let's watch that again. They do this clean, they pull it up and then drop under it, catch it in their arm, one arm over it. So all of the weight is in that front arm with the wrist broken back, and then they squat it up, they stand up. So just like a bent press, there's like a specific position you have to get into. I'm sure stacking your elbow in the right position requires flexibility, years of doing it. So there's positional cues you have to hit to be able to pull this off. I mean, Martins or anybody who's like sufficiently strong probably isn't going to be able to get into this position without a fuck ton of training. So these guys that started doing it young, they're going to accommodate this position better. That makes more sense. But what gets me is, even if you account for that position, the way the weight moves. For instance, they called this 130. This is 286 pounds, and it's round. It's a sphere, and you see Martins pressing it relatively easily. Well, we can look at the Rogue, where Martins really struggled with a 300-pound stone that was rounder and flatter. So again, does it weigh what they say it weighs? If this is only 330, why wouldn't Martins pick it up? Why wouldn't he give it a tug? So the flexibility is impressive, but look how quickly he snaps into that thing. I've loaded a 425 stone. I think it was a 21-inch mold, giant ass stone for reps. I could do a 330 probably for 12 reps over a bar inside of a minute. And in no point could I yank this thing off the ground with that amount of speed. Look at this dude's hand right here. Now the squat might be deceptively easier than it looks, because you would think this big stone out in front of you, that it's like a front squat on steroids. But actually, the way he's leaning back and his flexibility, it's right over his hips. So that's actually pretty good leverages for squatting, even though he's in a complete ass. I mean, look at that. He's picking up blades of grass with his sphincter. That is actually impressive by itself. But notice, he's got his wrist broken back. It's supporting the entire load. That's 330 pounds, not just in his hand. It's not just through his forearm. It's actually broken back through his wrist. Now, as he stands up easily, look how it levitates off his shoulder right there. As he stands up and repositions, he actually picks it up. He gets daylight off his shoulder. Never seen 330 move so easily off your chest. So I get the spirit of all of this and, trying to experience the way other people do things. But that's one of the reasons why I am skeptical of this. I saw comments saying like, oh no, they wouldn't bullshit this, trying to assign like some honor to Martins or like anybody else. Like they would find themselves in Pakistan, neck deep in somebody else's culture, no real tether to the outside world where they're kind of comfortable and know the score. Like they would step up and blow the whistle. Like they would go up to these guys and be like, that stone doesn't weigh what you say it was. Like put yourself in that position. Pakistan is not an easy place to navigate as a Westerner. And when you add on to that, the whole role of this entire series, the money invested, the time spent to go there, specifically to do a style of video that highlights the beauty of these cultural practices. It's easy to talk yourself out of being the guy that's going to go there and pull out a measuring tape and start being the enforcer for every ounce and every inch. So I don't know what the takeaway is from this video. I kind of wanted to expose you guys to this type of lifting. I think it's cool that it exists in other places. I'm not really surprised it exists in other places. And I do think some of the things that they've come up with are pretty cool applications. I mean, I could imagine walking around something like this with a turkey leg and a giant fucking beer. Like, in the dirt watching people get after it. That seems like a good time. The only thing I wanted to point out is that the like cultural worship that goes on of any group of people that are from somewhere else, it gets a little excessive to the point where we refuse to uphold basic standards, ask basic questions. Sometimes it's out of courtesy. I think in a situation like this, it's out of wanting to preserve your brand and not be seen as a bad guy. It's a pretty strong incentive. I think it's insulting to portray other cultures like this and assume that the same basic skepticism we apply to all humans should somehow be avoided here. I don't buy that. I think that falls into the soft bigotry of low expectations. I don't think these people are any different than you or me in their capacity to bullshit a little bit for a little bit of clout, or in the need for them to rise to basic standards. They're not Western standards. They're just fucking standard. So that's my rant on this. Let me know what you guys think. Leave your comments in the comment box. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.